Norwegian developer Funcom is creating a Dune Survival MMO based off their work on Conan Exiles, the vaunted Conan franchise's 2018 survival sandbox outing. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I cannot see this MMO turning out well. I just can't. While a survival MMO sounds like it fits Dune perfectly, big open desert world with precious resources and enemies on all sides, making it a survival MMO misses so much of the Dune franchise's potential in the video game medium. I'll get into why in a bit, but first, let's take a brief look at Dune and its history in the gaming sphere, and why each foray thus far into the Dune mythos hasn't really captured what Dune is all about. Look, if you're the kind of person to click on a YouTube video about a Dune video game, you probably don't need a rundown of what's going on in Dune. But maybe you just stan Timothée Chalamet and want to know what he's getting his windswept yet still perfectly coiffed hair into. Either way, think about all of this with regards to what video game potential you see in the setting, the characters, and the story. What would make a satisfying, unique gameplay loop? What stories you could tell in the universe? What sorts of genres you see working with the setting, not against it. Here we go. Written by Frank Herbert in 1965, Dune is a science fiction novel that follows the various factions vying for control of the desert planet Arrakis, colloquially known as Dune. Arrakis is the only place in the galaxy where melange, known as spice, can be harvested. Melange grants its huffers otherworldly abilities, prolonged life, enhanced mental capabilities, and fever dreams about Zendaya. It's also necessary for space travel, since the spice provides spaceship navigators with a sort of multi-dimensional foresight, glimpse of the future type shit. It also turns your eyes bright blue, which is not the best look, but that's the price you pay for seeing the future because drugs. Timothée Chalamet is Paul Atreides, a member of House Atreides, which is led by Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto Atreides and Rebecca Ferguson as his concubine Jessica. Jessica is an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit, a coven of bald women who can kinda predict the future and are also masters of reading the emotions and minds of others while masking their own. As well, the Bene Gesserit use a technique called the voice, a special way of modulating their words to influence others. They're a bit nefarious, hidden agendas and whatnot, but Jessica's cool, and Paul's parents totally actually love each other. And yes, before you ask, it's the crazy future, but there's characters named Paul and Jessica and Duncan and Gurney, and it was the 60s, okay? So Duke Leto Atreides gets told by the Emperor that he's to preside over Arrakis, but the Emperor is in secret cahoots with the evil Harkonnen family, who are setting a trap for Duke Leto on the planet. And their Harkonnens, they're extra gross and evil and bad, and one of them is Sting. Dune itself is super inhospitable. There's lots of sand, and you've got to wear these fabulous leather get-ups whenever you go out into the desert so you don't lose your water and shrivel up like a raisin. You've also got to vary your gait while walking, almost like a dance, since the sandworms below can sense the telltale pitter-patter of feet on the surface, and they eat that shit up, literally. Anyway, the Atreides family arrives on Arrakis, and in turn, Oscar Isaac goes 90% conquistador and has a difficult time understanding why the Freemen, the natural nomadic inhabitants of Arrakis, of whom Zendaya is a prominent member, aren't their biggest fans. Also, on top of all of that, Timothée Chalamet is basically Jesus. Paul Atreides is both the Kwisatz Haderach, the prophesied mega-being of the Bene Gesserit that will bring balance to the Force, and Muad'Dib, the prophesied messiah of the Freemen that will lead them to a land of milk and honey or whatever. Quite the mantle for young Timothy, but I think he can handle it. That's the gist of it without getting into too many story spoilers, but there's also mentats, basically human computers who are sometimes assassins, swordmasters of Ganaz, a school that churns out uber warriors that turn into Minecraft characters when they fight, a million guilds governing everything from the space economy to space shipping to space doctors, and, of course, big-ass worms. Essentially, Dune is all of this stuff before they were even a twinkle in their neckbeard creator's eye. But really, all you need to know is this. At its core, Dune is about pulling strings, either to maintain power or seize power. Everything else is window dressing on that theme. Alright, so we've got this baller setting, a hostile desert planet, a bunch of factions and special people that can see the future, and worms, all trying to control this precious spice. But what types of games currently reside in Dune's stable? Dune video games have historically gone two routes. Games about armies, or games about Paul. What are the Dune games about armies? Well, mostly real-time strategy games, RTSs. You've got Dune 2, released in 1992 by Westwood Studios, a commercial and critical success often heralded as the first modern RTS and a pioneer for the genre. You've got the 1998 remake of Dune 2, Dune 2000, with updated state-of-the-art computer graphics and everyone's favorite, cutscenes featuring real actors. And you've got the sequel to Dune 2000, Emperor: Battle for Dune, which was mostly a rehash of Dune 2000 and was panned as such. All of these games see you take up the mantle of a major Dune house, mine spice, and spin that valuable spice production into military might in an effort to destroy rival houses and wrest control of Arrakis once and for all. On the whole, these games have been loved by many people, and the real-time strategy genre owes much of its success to them, but they don't particularly dive into the political machinations of the Dune universe, mostly just throwing armies at one another until one of you gets tuckered out. In this way, they're best described as Dune-skinned RTSs rather than full-fledged Dune games. Next, we've got Dune games about Paul. Really, we've only got one game that truly fits that bill. Frank Herbert's Dune, released in 2001 by Cryo Interactive. This is a 3D action-adventure game based off the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, and boy, is it terrible. You play as Paul, and through a variety of dull missions that roughly follow the novel's story, you sneak up to bad guys, stab them with your crysknife, take their items, and solve dumb puzzles. I don't know, that's what some one-star review on the Wayback Machine described it like. I, of course, never actually played it because it came out when I was 8 and I had better shit to do at that age. Cryo Interactive went bankrupt because this game was a flop, if that gives you any idea of what we're working with. But one of these Dune games actually hit closer to the mark of what makes Dune, well, Dune. It was a combination of our two types of Dune games, about both Paul Atreides and the warring factions of Dune. It was the very first Dune game too, the 1992 adventure strategy game Dune, also developed by Cryo Interactive. It follows the story of the first novel, where you, again playing as Paul, manage both alliances, rivalries, and spice production. The game plays like a hybrid between a real-time strategy game and a point-and-click adventure game, with the ability to switch between these two layers to better manage problems at both the macroscopic and personal levels. While not perfect, it was received really well, and it was praised for better distilling what Dune is all about, the overarching politics with the human story at the center. But there are other Dune gaming properties that have come and gone over the years too, ones that exemplify Dune better than any of the existing video games have thus far. Avalon Hill's Dune, a strategy board game released in 1979, has been praised over the years for not only being a great board game, but also for faithfully capturing the air of Dune. It's got rival factions plotting against each other, alliances, battles decided by secret trick-taking, mechanics to simulate the perils of the desert planet in the form of a prevailing storm that wipes your units off the map. The Bene Gesserit have a win condition where if, at the outset of the game, they guess what player will win and what turn it will happen on, they instead win, an approximation of their manipulation of other factions to advance their hidden agenda. I just think that's such an awesome, unique, fitting mechanic that it deserves mention, especially as evidence of the care that went into crafting this weird late 70s board game. There's also the Dune tabletop RPG, Dune: Chronicles of the Imperium, which was published by Wizards of the Coast in 2000. While it's still an excellent adaptation of the setting, basically no one played it due to numerous legal challenges between Frank Herbert's estate and Wizards of the Coast, which resulted in a print run of only 3,000 copies. But those PDFs are out there if you go a-lookin'. Anyway, in the Dune RPG, you pick a house allegiance and design your character as a member of that house's upper crust. You can play as a House Adept, a Bene Gesserit acolyte who always has one foot in the dealings of her sisterhood, an assassin, that silver-tongued silencer of enemy agents, a strategist with ties to the galactic economic machine, a Mentat, a human computer specially trained to synthesize vast swaths of information for their house noble, a Swordmaster, the martial defender of the house, or even the noble themselves. Each character archetype bears the standard traits and pitfalls you'd expect of a tabletop RPG, and parties must work together to navigate scenarios thrown at them by the DM, from trade disputes with shadowy players on both sides, to subverting ecological meltdown at the hands of a mutineering crew at a spice processing plant. And now, with the new movie coming out in 2021, the Dune property is getting hot again. New video games in development, a reprint of the Dune board game, a new tabletop RPG rulebook, Adventures in the Imperium. Dune is going to be freaking everywhere over the next few years. But are any of the video games going to be actually good? Let's find out. You might have noticed going over Dune's history as a video game, a board game, and a tabletop RPG, I ragged on its iterations as a video game far more than those other properties. There's a reason for that. Those Dune video games from the 90s and early 2000s, I contend that all of them focused on aspects of Dune that are unimportant to the property's overall fabric and potential as a video game setting. Fighting words, I know. But first, let's tackle those RTSs. While most of them were good RTSs, by virtue of just being RTSs, they miss the point of Dune. It's not about the battles. I'll say it again for the people in the back. Dune is not about the battles. Sure, battles happen, but remember what I said about the tenet at the core of Dune? Dune is about pulling strings, seizing or maintaining power. In the Dune universe, battles themselves are simply the predetermined, inevitable reenacting of the skirmishes already fought with words, deceit, and careful analysis on the parts of nobles, strategists, gifted mentats, prescient Bene Gesserit advisors, and spy masters. The people in the room. They do battle by deliberating, lying, and politicking, so the result of the eventual skirmishes are pretty much known before a single shot is even fired. Betrayals and feints are discovered in the minute change of expression at a bluff, the subtle susceptibility to a throwaway suggestion, the metered response to a wild accusation. Dune is the amplification of those gifted tacticians, observers, empaths, analysts. The dudes swinging swords carry far less importance to the outcome of warring factions than these individuals. Dune is Foundation, not Starship Troopers, plotting your opponent's downfall hundreds of years into the future, while also navigating your own mortality, tempering your own thoughts so they don't betray you to a skilled mentat, thinking, reacting, questioning the validity of the action you're going to take 5 moves down the line. The chess match. Therefore, RTS gameplay is reductive to Dune's overall philosophy, because the RTS genre hinges on the battles not being decided by the people in the room. RTS games give the player agency in the battle's outcomes, which is great for gameplay and player buy-in, but this runs antithetical to Dune's ethos. Yes, you can slap a Dune skin on an RTS and have some interesting mechanics to boot, but the battles are not what made people fall in love with Dune. The fact that most Dune video games have forced it down that path is disappointing and short-sighted given the richness and potential of the setting. Likewise, I don't think the roots of a good Dune video game lie in Paul's story. Don't get me wrong, I think Dune is an amazing novel, but recreating Paul's story in video game form is just asking for yet another mid-2000s level movie video game tie-in. The reason why this wouldn't work is almost identical to why Dune RTSs miss the point. Paul's story itself isn't about action. Paul gets those glimpses of the future, of how things will happen. So much of the novel focuses on him honing this ability, learning diplomacy in his father's war room, unveiling the machinations and hidden intentions of various court personalities. He does train in fighting with crysknives, but far more emphasis is put on bettering his mental fortitude, since most wars in Dune are solved by being a more skilled negotiator than your opponent, not by being skilled with a crysknife. And then, when Paul is finally thrust into the unforgiving desert, his journey is far more a mental, spiritual, survival one than a stab shit sort of one. There's a few duels, some set pieces escaping from sandworms, but what about everything I've mentioned screams satisfying gameplay loop to you? I don't know, maybe someone smarter than me could come up with one, but Frank Herbert's Dune back in 2001 sure as heck didn't. So, what does that leave us with? Say we want to capture more of Dune in our video game than is afforded by RTSs or games about Paul, since we've argued those ain't it. We want the expansiveness of the Dune tabletop RPG, an emphasis on surviving in the dangerous desert like in the novel, but maybe we want to shy away from Paul's story and instead look to a different age in the Imperium. What type of game has crunchy survival RPG mechanics, a multitude of classes, open worlds, and large, overarching conflicts that players can participate in? Why, survival MMOs, of course! I'm sure that's exactly what Legendary Pictures was thinking when they entrusted Funcom to develop one in the world of Dune. Conan Exiles is still going strong despite the dreaded stint in early access and the universally mediocre reviews, so why not Dune 2? Heck, Funcom basically already made a Dune MMO RPG 20 years ago. Anarchy Online's ongoing storyline revolves around the fictional desert planet Ruby Ka, the source of a valuable mineral known as Notum. You could just inject Conan Exiles with that energy, give players a David Lynch cheat sheet, and you'd be good to go, right? But alas. While on paper a survival MMO sounds like it could check all of those boxes of what a good Dune game should be, survival MMO gameplay and overarching design do not lend themselves to the variety of factions, archetypes, and paths present in Dune. Notice anything about the footage I've been showing of games from Funcom's library? Almost everything is tailored around either fighting or making sure your leather outfit has the right amount of breathability for the current climate. If all you've made are MMOs in this mold, you're probably not going to look too far past your existing action and survival mechanics, save maybe a couple branching dialogue trees, to craft a Dune MMO. When all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. What I mean by using that quote is, MMORPG design caters around shoot this guy, or shoot this monster, or shoot this drug, since at the end of the day, every character is equipped to do damage or facilitate those who do. And do I gotta say it again? Dune is not really about action. Honestly, if we get right down to it, it's not really about dudes surviving in the desert either. A Dune game set solely in the desert would be like a Game of Thrones game about a nameless soldier going off to war for his bannerlord. Maybe you could make a good game out of that premise, but that kinda misses the point of Game of Thrones, no? The random peon is so insulated from the squabbles of angry lords and ladies that a game focused on him shipping off to the twins to get fucked up by Walder Frey's army of daughters/wives might as well not be called GOT. The same can be said for Dune. Look at those character archetypes you could play in the Dune tabletop RPG. A Bene Gesserit adept, who plots and influences others for the betterment of not only her house, but that of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood as well. A strategist, vying for economic dominance on the part of his noble. A glorified mathematician, the Mentat. Yes, they can hold a weapon, but for these guys its use would only be as a very last resort. Heck, I didn't mention this one before, but you can be a doctor. Just a doctor. Or how about the noble herself? What the fuck is a doctor or a noble going to do if a Swordmaster of Ganaz comes a-swinging? Or better yet, a fucking sandworm? Is the adept going to talk it into rethinking its current course while the Swordmaster wails on it? Is the Mentat going to crunch the numbers on how fucked they are? Don't even get me started on how broken any semblance of PvP would be. Really, I see a Dune MMO playing out three ways. You either give these non-martial, talky character archetypes a stupid reason to participate in fights when their characters would never actually do that in Dune, you section off those parts of the game to only be accessible to martial characters, or you remove those classes from the game, classes that Dune is incomplete without. All of those options are shitty. Any way you crisp-knife it, you're leaving a lot of stuff fundamental to Dune on the table by making it a survival MMO. And at the end of the day, do you really trust a game cribbing from Conan Exiles to be a satisfying, deep, richly textured MMO experience that does justice to the variety of paths present in Dune? Paths where at least half of them should never participate in combat as a means of earning XP?
No.
Let's take a step back. Dune is what I consider a quote-unquote big property. What do I mean by that? I mean that a single video game can't fully encompass what Dune is about, or tell every tale or type of tale there is in the Imperium. Think Star Wars. Even as just the original trilogy of movies, the types of stories it told, and by extension, the types of video games that could be set in that universe, were far more numerous than could be captured in a single video game experience. You've got Jedis swinging lightsabers, X-Wings dogfighting with TIE fighters, grand space battles that span entire sectors, rugged ground assaults, swashbuckling rogues that make residence in back alleys, underworld crime bosses, action-adventure, RTS, flight sim, RPG, fucking pinball? Try to cram all of that into one game, you're bound to leave out something important to the fabric of Star Wars, or at the very least do some aspect of disservice. The same goes for Dune. You've got warring factions, politicking, backstabbing, unique characters with crazy abilities, all set in a land hostile to outsiders and natives alike. So what video games best suit big properties? The answer is smaller, more intimate vignettes in those worlds. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order didn't tackle all of Star Wars. It tackled one aspect of it, a lone Jedi searching for answers and kin. And it did that one thing extremely well. In not trying to be all of Star Wars, it succeeded at being a great Star Wars game. But even though action-adventure games focused on Paul's story, RTSs, and MMOs might fit that bill, embodying just an aspect of Dune instead of the whole thing, they don't do a good job getting at what Dune is about, so by extension, they won't be good adaptations of the property itself. Here are the elements I see as essential to the Dune video game that would best capture the spirit of Dune, while not trying to be all of Dune. First, it's an RPG. You got your numbers, you got your skills, you got your Hawaiian Punch stained character sheet. Since Dune focuses so heavily on politics and the corresponding maneuvering, your character's background, hidden motives, archetype, influence, and special conversational abilities would all be of import in navigating the world and seeing your goals met. Having an RPG framework, you've got stats to pick at character creation that tailor your build, as well as skills you know at the outset. Maybe you're a Bene Gesserit adept who's a novice at using voice, that modulation of her words that allows her to influence the subconscious minds of others, but she's dumped a bunch of her points into the Bene Gesserit way, her ability to perceive minute microtics and other emotions and predilections, and this opens a variety of dialogue options unavailable to other characters. Or perhaps you're a Mentat assassin, able to perfectly recall any fine detail you've encountered, which helps you infiltrate enemy strongholds, but this duality in your build limits the heights you can reach on the Mentat and Assassin tracks. First person, third person, isometric, whatever, as long as it's an RPG, we're Gucci. Plus, you've got the backbone of the old Dune tabletop RPG to go off of, as well as the new system coming in 2021. And there have been like a million RPGs successfully cribbed from tabletop frameworks, so another ain't no thing. Best comp, Disco Elysium. But conversations and your ability to read others are built around the Deus Ex Mankind Divided interrogations. While fighting might be present or a viable method for certain characters, it's not required. Like I mentioned previously, not all Dune characters' first reaction is to stab things, but that doesn't make them characters that you shouldn't be able to play as, or characters to be crammed into a martial build. Here's why an immersive sim might fit Dune well. Each scenario presented to the player might have a variety of different methods to path it, but only some are accessible to a given archetype. Simplifying a bit, but maybe the assassin can sneak through, maybe the Mentat can coordinate a distraction, maybe the Bene Gesserit can talk her way past. Regardless, the viable options to you would complement whatever archetype or class you play as. Sure, you'd need some stellar encounter design to make that happen, but we're aiming big here, alright? Best comp, Mary Jane sections of Spider-Man, but not shitty. Pacifist approach to Deus Ex, Planescape Torment, Undertale, Cyberpunk Quick Hacks, Prey. Small actions have potentially large consequences. A micro-expression caught by a skilled Bene Gesserit can be the razor's edge between success and failure. A minor slip-up or divulging of secret information can turn the tides of entire wars. And as one of those characters on the front line, your actions have a price associated with them. Best comp, KOTOR, but it's Kill Bastila all the way down. The dinner party mission in Oblivion, Splinter Cell Double Agent. Lastly, it's set, at least in large part, on Arrakis. The namesake of the franchise, Arrakis is the pressure cooker so necessary for the setting. On Arrakis, unless you're fully prepared to live in the unforgiving wilderness like the Freemen, there aren't very many places to make residence. And this close proximity between the cast of characters with mutually exclusive interests, coupled with the desert pressing in from all sides and the scarcity of water and spice, breeds suspicion, hostility, and intrigue, all the stuff necessary to make a good plot function. Yes, there's plenty of planets in the Dune series, a bountiful cornucopia of other worlds on which you could focus, but fuck, it's called Dune, so it's gotta be set on Dune, okay? And by extension, the desert must feature prominently. But you don't go there right away. It's gotta have some mysticism to it, some innate danger, conveyed in whispers and darting looks, ones that cannot be impressed upon the player by making a trip into the Waste some trivial affair. North of the Wall, Dathomir, Helheim. So too for the desert. You don't need to be a fighter to venture out into the harsh desert either. Those squishy diplomatic characters can go too. In the desert, your skill is not in your strength or combat prowess per se, but more in your mental fortitude, your insistence on varying your gait, the actions you take to prevent becoming a sandworm's dinner. Even with proper equipment, your chance of survival slowly dwindles the longer you're exposed to the elements. The heat eats at your mind. Best comp, Breath of the Wild's desert, but you wear the exact opposite getup as Link. So what kind of game can you make out of these elements? Here's just one idea. You're a member of a major house on Arrakis. Though you're not in open war with the other houses of the Landsraad yet, things have gotten tense recently. Water on Arrakis is growing scarcer. Spice lines have been destroyed or raided by smugglers. The Padishah Emperor's mercenaries, the ruthless, fanatical Sardaukar, have become an occupying force on Dune in all but name. You're a fixer of sorts, be it a Mentat, a spy, a marshal lieutenant, a Ben Gesserit, or yes, even a Sook doctor. Regardless of who you are, you're one of those people in the room who has the ear of the noble of your house. You're privy to those negotiations that will determine the fate of all living on Dune. But soon you discover that a hidden actor is maneuvering on Arrakis, a secretive new house that threatens the delicate balance. They're the real reason the Sardaukar are clamping down on Arrakis. Perhaps they're also the saboteur behind the diminishing spice flow. While contending with rival houses, managing these warring personalities, you need to also manage this new house too, and shortly you find that they're even more insidious to your operation than you thought. No one can be trusted. Do you let your noble in on your suspicions? Or do you keep them in the dark until you know more? You receive a cryptic message with coordinates out into the desert. If you do decide to divulge that secret communique to a confidant, they downplay its importance. It's nothing, so why fret? But it eats at you. You need to investigate. Something is out there. But you can't just take an ornithopter out into the desert. That'll put you on someone's radar. Instead, you need to find a guide to get you out into the wastes. An underworld connection to be made. At last you make it to the coordinates, but it's a horrible sight. The annihilated settlement built up on a rocky bluff bears the telltale burn marks of your house's weapons. Is it a setup, or did your people really do this? The new house makes contact. They try to recruit you, citing the horrible atrocities your house is routinely committing. Do you join them and take down your old house? Or do you continue fighting them, joining their side as a double agent? That's for you to decide. A game like that has everything crucial to making Dune work. Meaningful choices, an emphasis on lying, politicking, and infiltration being key to working one or both sides over, and it doesn't try and bend this unique setting into a preconceived type of video game. And I didn't even say what genre this would be either. Isometric CRPG, point and click, immersive sim, full-blown open world RPG, any of them would do. All of them would be more in the spirit of Dune than any Dune video game has been thus far. As of now, the upcoming Dune game's primary failure is that it's the only Dune video game content we know we're getting, so by extension, it's got to encompass all of Dune while leaving so much of it still unexplored. But you know what? If we did have a Dune game that was more emblematic of the core tenets of the property, that would open the door for more of those smaller vignettes into the world. Yes, even the RTSs and the MMOs, since they wouldn't have to bear the weight of the entire property all by their lonesome. Chome insurance adjuster investigating deaths at a spice mining rig, a la Return of the Obra Dinn. Spice scavenger crossing the desert with the ever-present worm hunting them, like the Pathless. A tribunal arbitrating a conflict between two contentious major houses. Frickin' Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney? Fuck, you can take the RTSs and the MMOs, just give me one of these. But maybe leave Frank Herbert's Dune out in the desert to die though. While Funcom has quite a few MMOs under their belt, they also made another game that I didn't touch on earlier. Funcom made The Longest Journey, a critically acclaimed 1999 point-and-click adventure game that featured a beautifully realized protagonist, expansive dialogue, challenging puzzles, and a complex story about writing the balance between parallel universes. The talent is there for Funcom to make a Dune game worthy of being enshrined in the Pantheon. But even if the first Dune video game outing in 20 years falters by virtue of just being a survival MMO, maybe other Dune games in the future will be so wholly unique and fitting of the setting that this one being an MMO doesn't really matter. Dune is such a rich and vast property that there are millions of untold stories in the Imperium worth exploring. And really, I'm just excited that we're going to start exploring them again.